Johnny Harris is everyone's favorite federal agent, I mean liberal journalist. He made a name for himself at Vox, where he was highly respected and sought after for his incredible editing style and motion graphics. At Vox, he produced the ever-successful Emmy-nominated show Borders, which covered geopolitical events taking place at international borders.
My name is Johnny Harris, and I make videos here at Vox. For the past 6 months, I've been traveling around to faraway places to tell the story of borders.
Johnny Harris even won an Emmy in 2021 for his New York Times production Blue State's You're the Problem.
So I won an Emmy.
Since leaving Vox, he's continued to produce high-quality content following the same topics, albeit very biased reporting, specifically when it comes to discussions of America's foreign adversaries.
8 years after China grabbed Xinjiang, the Chinese government did the same thing to an even more remote region at the highest plateau in the world, Tibet. They annexed this place that is 3 times the size of Texas. It has its own very distinct language, culture, identity, and does not identify or connect with Beijing.
Tibet was literally a feudal slave mandate, autonomous zone.
China did them a favor.
That was one. I mean, in America, when I say something like this, people get very upset. You know, we talk about the Dalai Lama saying "suck my tongue" or whatever, but like that's not far from the norm in normal Tibetan existence before the Communist Party came in and took over. This is a good way to describe Taiwan as well. The American federal government going into the South and killing, unfortunately not all of them, but a decent amount of slavers and defenders of slavery.
Tibet is the South in the Civil War?
Yes.
Now, I'll be honest, I've made videos about Johnny Harris in the past, specifically on his takes about America's relationship with China. That being said, I do like Johnny Harris. I think ultimately he's a force for good. While his takes are incredibly surface level at best, at least he's discussing topics like the Iraq War and our meddling in foreign elections.
But this document wasn't about that. It was about Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with 9/11.
It wasn't until this video, however, that I started to get a really gross feeling about Johnny Harris. This video's original title was Why You're Wrong About Joe Rogan, only for it to be changed 30 days later to now be called The Rise of Joe Rogan Explained. Now, I think Johnny Harris changed the title just because he's getting a lot of flack for it, and I guess by changing the title to this, he's sort of stepping away and saying like, okay, maybe you're not wrong about Joe Rogan, let me just say I'm gonna explain his rise to fame. But when I first saw this video on my YouTube homepage, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. Perhaps this will be a well-researched look into how his popularity grew to a massive level, where he was bought out by Spotify for hundreds of millions of dollars, only to inevitably lose mainstream legitimacy after platforming out and about fascists and questioning modern medicine at the height of the pandemic.
I'm not an anti-vax person.
Right.
In fact, I said I believe they're safe, and I encourage many people to take them. My parents were vaccinated. I just said I don't think that if you're a young, healthy person that you need it.
Unfortunately, my guess couldn't have been further from the truth. Johnny Harris starts off his video by saying that he was never a listener of the Joe Rogan Experience, but after producing this video about Joe Rogan, he's now been forced to listen to a ton of the Joe Rogan Experience.
Now listen, I am not a Joe Rogan listener. Well, at least I wasn't before this story. But by now, I am. Because by now, me and my team have listened to a lot of Joe Rogan.
Safe to assume we're about to get a really in-depth and well-researched look into the rise and fall of Joe Rogan, right? No. We start off this video with some classic glazing.
They are anticipating a wipeout in the finals.
Yeah! And I mean, this guy's good. Like, he's got such a magnetic personality, even back then.
Johnny first goes into the early days of Joe Rogan, how he started out doing stand-up comedy and getting some small roles in sitcoms, only to inevitably fall into podcasting. Johnny explains that at the start of the Joe Rogan Experience, a lot of the guest appearances were from people like boxers, comedians, actors, and overall, just pretty famous people. Johnny then goes on to explain that there was a shift at one point or another. Johnny calls this era of the Joe Rogan Experience the thinker era.
Soon he started to branch outside of comedians and fighters to a different genre of people, let's call them thinkers. The show started to become just a grab bag of any interesting person Joe Rogan wanted to have a conversation with.
These thinkers are people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Dr. Cornel West, Bernie Sanders, Elon Musk. I guess he's a thinker. Something Johnny fails to mention during this thinker era of the Joe Rogan Experience is that because of Joe's blind curiosity, he was the forefront of the alt-right pipeline.
Alt-right pipeline.
The alt-right pipeline.
The alt-right pipeline that sucks vulnerable white teenage boys in, makes them angry at the world, makes them blame all their problems on minorities and shit.
And the whole point of the alt-right pipeline and the pyramid of violence is that folks become desensitized and begin to dehumanize other people gradually over a prolonged period of time. And this seeps out as a cultural phenomenon. And it changes our culture, and it makes bigotry and racism more acceptable in our culture. People don't fall down the rabbit hole suddenly. They tend to sink in slowly, and the more they're surrounded by other bigoted people and people with prejudiced ideas, the more rapidly that descent will go, individually and as a society.
Not only did he have incredibly famous actors and comedians on the program, but he also brought on a lot of political commentators who he was interested in at the time. These weren't just any political commentators, however. These were far-right political commentators who had a clear agenda to uphold. And by making an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, they were able to make a name for themselves and grow their base of fascist ideology online, all thanks to Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan single-handedly propelled the careers of countless right-wing content creators. People like Jordan Peterson, Stefan Molyneux, and Milo Yiannopoulos, just to name a few. And this wasn't 2023 Joe Rogan interviewing these people. This was 2013 I'm just a centrist Joe Rogan. At the time of Joe Rogan's interview with Milo Yiannopoulos, Milo wasn't just some random guy on the right. He was a well-known, successful writer for Breitbart. If you don't know about Breitbart, all you need to know is that at the peak of their journalism, they had a tab at the top of their website titled Black Crime. It literally just focused on crimes that were committed by black people. And this tab still exists today, but it's labeled something else. Now it's labeled Dem City Crime. I mean, it's the same thing. This is the same Breitbart that Ben Shapiro used to write for, but he left because they got too anti-Semitic. But they had the Black Crime tab at the time of him writing there. It was just once they got to anti-Semitism, that's when it crossed the line. During his time at Breitbart, Milo Yiannopoulos admitted to deliberately inserting Nazi propaganda into his writing in order to further radicalize the far right. But does Johnny Harris mention this once during this entire 35-minute puff piece on Joe Rogan? No, of course not. He doesn't mention Milo Yiannopoulos a single time. I feel as though I sort of have an interesting perspective on this topic, because I did listen to Joe Rogan back in 2014, 2015, and I did fall down the alt-right pipeline. It's not something I like talking about because it is incredibly embarrassing, but I think a lot of men my age had a very similar experience to mine growing up. Some out-and-about fascist is introduced to you as just some normal guy on the Joe Rogan Experience, and then you start watching his content, only to slip further and further down the rabbit hole. When you're 13 years old, the only people you want to listen to are the ones spouting the same exact things you're already thinking. And the thoughts of a 13-year-old boy aren't necessarily the smartest. Luckily, at about the time of the 2016 election, I sort of gained consciousness and just realized how much of an idiot I was. And I moved a little bit further left and became like a Bernie guy. And then a few years later, when the pandemic was occurring and there were nationwide riots happening, all of those events made me realize once again how much of an idiot I was, and I moved further left and now consider myself a socialist. Johnny goes on to say that after watching countless hours of the Joe Rogan Experience, he's come away with a few takeaways. Johnny's first takeaway from the exploration into Joe Rogan is that Joe hates boxes. Okay.
I now have some big takeaways, some things I want to say. Number one, Joe hates boxes.
And people love that he hates boxes.
He spends a lot of time lambasting our society's need to fit people into buckets, into labels.
I think this left, right paradigm is really kind of fucking foolish at this point.
And indeed, it's fairly impossible to put Joe Rogan into the standard ideological boxes that we're all sort of pressured to fit into. Most of our media discourse loves boxes, loves to inflame our super identities, the things that we must believe in order to be a good liberal or a good conservative.
Johnny is acting like he didn't work at Vox.com and doesn't continue to make the same content that relies on putting people into boxes. And Joe Rogan? He absolutely puts people in boxes. Literally any trans person he ever hears about, he immediately puts them into a box. Joe Rogan literally fell for the hoax about litter boxes in classrooms.
My friend, his wife, is a school teacher. And she works at a school that had to install a litter box in the girls' room because there is a girl who's a furry who identifies as an animal. And her mother badgered the school until they agreed to put a litter box in one of the stalls.
Johnny then goes on to try to make the most absurdist claim out there, saying that all of these racist and homophobic and transphobic clips of Joe Rogan out there, they are all taken out of context.
And so before I listened to a million hours of the show, I had mostly seen Joe Rogan in the context of like short little edited clips of like smackdowns showing like some egregious thing that Joe Rogan had said, that he was transphobic or fatphobic or misogynistic or racist. There's a lot of these mashups out there.
She's giant. Like, look at the size of her head, her formerly male head.
Yeah.
That's a giant woman.
We walk into we walked in dude. We walked in the door and there was no white people. There was no white people.
You know what Joe Rogan said there that Johnny had to bleep? He said he walked into the planet of the apes. But right, he's just misunderstood. This was just taken out of context.
And when you watch this stuff, it's so easy to just like slot him into like, oh, he must be like some far right sort of like racist reactionary commentator.
And he is that. He literally is that. What are you talking about, Johnny?
So I was surprised, honestly, when I listened to a lot of this guy to find out that his politics actually lean mostly left.
What? You're gonna make this claim in 2023? Okay, maybe in like 2018 you could have made this claim, that he had some minute leftist takes, like on free healthcare and things like that. That was about it, honestly, and maybe weed. But like, no, in 2023, you cannot say that Joe Rogan is on the left.
Openly and earnestly voices support for everything from universal healthcare to abortion to gay marriage to recreational drugs.
I lean way left when it comes to those kind of things, gay rights and things like social programs for disenfranchised people and disenfranchised communities. I lean way like if I want my tax dollars to go to anything, I want it to go to making people's lives easier.
I'm not right wing at all. Oh, okay. No, that's wild.
No, there's nothing about me that's right wing.
Funny enough, this clip that Johnny uses to support his claim is in the old studio before he got bought out by Spotify, which was before the pandemic had occurred. Since the pandemic, Joe Rogan has gone on to support countless right-wing politicians, people like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, just to name a few.
I think Ron DeSantis would work as a good president. I mean, what he's done for Florida has been admirable. I feel like what he did for Florida, a lot of people gave him a lot of grief, but ultimately he was correct.
And it doesn't even matter what he says and if he considers himself a leftist. That's clearly proven false in the things he says and the people he has on his show. People on the right love calling themselves a leftist to somehow legitimize their opinion. Johnny's next big takeaway from looking deep into Joe Rogan is that he sells contrarianism. Sure, but what Johnny really means by this is that Joe Rogan sells reactionary politics. And isn't that just so great for our country? That's great entertainment. Joe Rogan's, he's just such a force for good in this world.
Joe Rogan sells contrarianism. That is his product. A quick reminder that Joe Rogan isn't just a guy. He is a commercial icon, a seasoned performer who performs for an audience for money. He knows what people want, and he is selling something very popular. An alternative to the endless reductionist, polarized name-calling of our current discourse.
He tries to make this claim that anyone can come on to the Joe Rogan Experience and have their voice be heard.
And he goes to great lengths to stake himself out as this anti-authority, anti-establishment platform where anyone can come and talk.
But this couldn't be further from the truth. If you've ever talked poorly about Joe Rogan, in any sense, whether it's about the things he says or the people he has on or not providing pushback for the people he has on. If you do any of that, you are never getting invited onto the Joe Rogan Experience. And if you somehow get invited on the show because you are part of a big television show like Adam Conover was, yet you disagree with Joe on certain things like trans rights, he'll shove you into the ground and make no attempt to have any type of dialogue or discussion on the matter.
Well, you know, my child from a very young age consistently said, I am a girl, and has never contradicted themselves, never changed their mind. And so the humane thing and the thing that he felt was good to do as a parent was to embrace that choice on his child's part, right?
Okay, but if that's who they are, if they think that they're a girl, why do you have to give them hormones to make them more of a girl?
Because, I'm sorry, can you expand on the question?
It's a simple question.
And you will never get invited back again. Has Adam Conover been invited back? I don't think so. Some people are even blacklisted from ever appearing on the show because of their opinions that they've already made clear, like Sam Cedar and Hassan Piker.
I will never be invited on the Joe Rogan Experience. Let's be real. Doesn't matter if I'm the most famous person on the planet. That is the reality.
I think he likes the appeal of being this anti-mainstream platform where anyone who has been canceled by the woke mob can come and get their fair shake, tell their side of the story.
There's a huge difference between being anti-woke in the sense that you're against the performative nature of neoliberalism and just being straight up transphobic like Joe Rogan. The next big takeaway from Johnny Harris, this being his biggest critique of Joe Rogan, is that he lets people talk.
Which gets me to my third point, and this is where I have my biggest critique of Joe Rogan. Joe lets people talk, and talk, and talk, and talk.
This aspect of Joe Rogan could actually be a good thing, and it was at one point or another. But when you're not bringing on any political commentators from the left, and you're only inviting on right-wing political commentators, coupled with the fact that he gives absolutely zero pushback on any of the crazy things these people are saying, this aspect of Joe Rogan ultimately becomes a negative. If he's gonna have people on like Alex Jones and Candace Owens, he needs to be capable of some kind of pushback, because at the end of the day, these aren't just random people off the street with some mainstream opinions. These are right-wing political commentators with a clear agenda to uphold, with funding from oil billionaires hoping to move society farther to the right. It's their entire job to make their position on the matter seem palatable and like they're on the right side of history. But Joe just sits there and nods and says, yeah. But if anyone tries to fight for trans rights, then Joe really speaks up. In comparison, someone like Ethan Klein of the H3 podcast has countless questionable guests on the show. However, it's the sole purpose of having these guests on that he's gonna rebut their claims and make them seem really stupid.
I have a theory for you.
I'm ready.
Okay, cool. I think you actually fake having Tourette's. Yeah, I think you actually don't have it.
Well, I'm open to.
Here's my.
What did you think I had?
Well, let me just break it down. I think this is kind of a funny thing. I doubt this is what happened, but maybe you just called someone the N-word on the bus, and then you're like, oh no, I have Tourette's.
Johnny Harris goes on to give Joe Rogan the tiniest of critiques, saying that maybe the guests he has on aren't deserving of a voice.
Open-minded, likable guy who's very good at entertaining us, give his megaphone to other dudes who promote violence, who tear down science, who invent fake facts and talk about them like they're real. It doesn't promote curiosity. It normalizes lying. It validates factlessness, which is something that, if you haven't heard, we already have a problem with.
However, that claim is immediately retracted when he goes on to absolutely glaze both Candace Owens and Alex Jones.
And yet here he is on the Joe Rogan Experience, getting a chance to tell his side of the story.
When I started getting accused 4 years ago, a couple years into it, when I said, no, I think it happened, then people that I had interviewed and things started saying, he's involved, he's one of them.
Now listen, I'm going to tell you the truth right now and admit something, which is that when I watched this, I actually had a moment where I was like, oh my God, like here's Alex Jones in this like very calm environment. He's not like yelling like he does on InfoWars.
My heart's big. It's got hot blood going through it fast. I like to eat. I like to have children.
And I literally thought like, wait, is Alex Jones like,
was he wrongfully accused, or was this overly exaggerated? Was this like a witch hunt to censor this guy because he's like kind of has far right views? Because this felt like a proper moment for Jones to tell his side of the story. And he nearly persuaded me. But wait, no. Then I remembered that my full-time job is to do journalism.
No one died in 2012 in Sandy Hook.
And luckily, I sit around and fact check things all day. And I researched it. And I reminded myself that there's actually not a ton of nuance here.
Wow, Johnny Harris, you have outdone yourself with this journalism. Thank you for doing some amazing journalistic work. You were almost duped by Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, but then, out of the blue, you pulled out this little-known, mysterious, most expensive defamation settlement in the history of the United States. Here, good sir, you deserve another Emmy.
I spend every day of my life making sure that the things I tell you are factually accurate. If I get something wrong, it's a cardinal sin. In a world of algorithms and misinformation and Russian bots, it becomes nearly impossible to fact check everything you see, which is why we rely on trusted voices to help us navigate the information out there.
By that logic, this entire video is a sin to your journalistic integrity. And I 100% agree. During this entire 35-minute video about the rise of Joe Rogan, not once was a clip shown from 2020 or later, and not a single aspect of his anti-science ramblings and COVID denial was discussed in this entire video. That is 100% blatant journalistic malpractice. And based on Johnny's take on the matter, he should be incredibly embarrassed that he even put out this video to begin with. I'm honestly surprised it's still up. I mean, the dislikes are pretty high for a Johnny Harris video. You might think that this is the end of this Johnny Harris video. I mean, thank God. I've had enough. But wait. Johnny has a little bit more to say on the matter. This time, Johnny is basically sympathizing with Candace Owens, someone who has expressed great support for a very famous fascist German leader. You know who I'm talking about. She said that this man was just trying to make Germany great.
But if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine.
Happy Monday. Hitler was just trying to make Germany great again. And Candace Owens is okay with that.
And Johnny tries sympathizing with her by saying that now that she has had the time to talk on the Joe Rogan Experience, he can no longer hate this woman. He is now forced to see her as a human. We're just humans, man.
But, crucially, suddenly what I couldn't do was hate her, like was so easy before. It's really hard to hate someone when you listen to them speak. You inconveniently have to see them as a real human with feelings and thoughts and ideas, and it becomes a lot harder to just put them into a bucket as someone I should hate. Which, of course, as we all know, is a huge thing that we've lost in our world of echo chambers, where we only hear from people that we agree with. And when we do hear from people we disagree with, it's often framed in an outrageous clickbaity article linked on Twitter entitled, "Watch the senator that you agree with destroy the person you disagree with and reinforce your views that they are a monster and that you are justified in hating them." This is how I knew Candace Owens before I listened to her speak for 2 hours. But now I see her as a person, a human who holds views that I see as objectively bad for people and our society. But I can't dehumanize her.
Johnny is basically saying that even though you're a fascist with incredibly homophobic and racist and all-around bigoted opinions, as long as you say it with a happy face and you're cordial in this discussion with Joe Rogan, I see you as a human, and there's nothing wrong with that. And aren't I such a good human for thinking that too? We can get past our differences, because one thing that this interview has allowed me to do is see you as a human, Candace Owens. Johnny, folks on the far right and far right ideology in general, you know, fascism, is not something to just brush past. Johnny is acting like this is just some lowly farmer who has never used a computer in their life and has come on to the Joe Rogan Experience to make their opinions be known. And through this, we can further understand where this person is coming from and somewhat sympathize with them and see them as a human and look past kind of these bigoted takes they have. No, Johnny, this is a right-wing political commentator with oil money, oil billionaire backers, and they are coming on to the Joe Rogan Experience with a clear agenda to uphold. They are coming onto the show with the sole purpose of boosting these right-wing ideas with the help of oil money. This isn't just some working class American in the coal mines who needs to have their voice heard. This is a fascist funded by fascists so they can spread fascism. It's that simple, Johnny. It's really not that hard to understand. Johnny's final takeaway from this video about Joe Rogan is that Joe models curiosity and openness. Huh?
And this gets me to my last takeaway, and then we'll finish up this video, which is that Joe Rogan models curiosity and openness. And this is valuable. It is rare and unique to watch a tough guy fighter, TV host, dirty comedian with a microphone admit that he's wrong.
Here's the thing. These are not like planned statements. Let's be real clear. I don't have an off-air and on-air voice. I don't.
No.
I have me.
This is it. You typically don't see stuff like this.
Do I get things wrong? Absolutely, I get things wrong, but I try to correct them.
What's so funny about this argument is that the clip he uses to support his argument is from Joe's infamous apology video where he talks about ivermectin and being against the COVID vaccine. Something Johnny Harris deliberately avoided during this entire puff piece on Joe Rogan. In the end, Johnny tries making the claim that Joe Rogan is ultimately a force for good in the fight against fake facts and misinformation.
And while I don't vibe with all of the ways that Joe expresses his manhood, I think he is a force for good in this department, in showing an eagerness to ask questions and an ability to change his mind.
This is the most laughable thing I've ever heard from Johnny Harris. Joe Rogan is literally the king of misinformation. That's been his entire career for the past 5 years. Clearly this guy has been living under a rock for the past few years, because Joe Rogan couldn't be further from someone who's committed to openness and curiosity. It's simply not true in any sense. At one point, somewhere around 2016, Joe Rogan was open to curiosity and welcomed a wide range of opinions onto his show. But that Joe Rogan is far behind us, and it's someone we will never see again.
Joe Rogan is a powerful man who changes his mind, who admits when he's wrong, which I think is a much needed counterbalance in an increasingly polarized world.
No, Johnny, he doesn't change his mind, and he contributes heavily to this polarized world. You, Johnny Harris, you are not a journalist. You are just some guy with a camera and a microphone and a knack for motion graphics. You might think that this is your ticket onto the Joe Rogan experience, and even if it is, this video alone has solidified you as a terrible journalist, something that folks on the left have been speculating for a long time now. This has been the wildest video I have ever seen from Johnny Harris, but now we can finally see him for who he is. He's certainly not a leftist, he's not even a liberal, but he's someone who sympathizes with the ever-growing threat to this nation that is ideological fascism. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please subscribe if you would be so kind. And if you liked this video, I think there are a few videos on my channel that you will also like as well. Thanks again, and peace and love.